Hello and welcome to Visiting Dugout, a Fans First Sports Network production. I am Crystal O'Keefe, and today I have Eli on from Fish on First to chat about this upcoming series. Eli, for those that don't know you, please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for having me on. Yes, I'm Mr. Fish on First, where we provide independent Miami Marlins coverage, and I think we do a pretty thorough job of doing so. Fishonfirst.com for all of our stuff, and you can find us on social as well. It's been a really interesting year where I'm proud of a lot of the reporting that we've done, but obviously the team it's been like a realistic worst case scenario for how 2024 is going to go. It's a 180 completely from where they were last year, but yeah, I'm embracing it. And I any baseball is better than no baseball, and we still have almost half of this ride still to go.
Yeah, I am in the same boat as the White Sox are terrible this year. We've been used to it though, but yeah, I actually just recently wrote about how I'm just kind of apathetic and I don't ever know what to write about anymore because this team is so frustrating to watch, but I still love them and I can never actually quit baseball. So I'm just going to keep doing it no matter what. So, what is new with this Marlins team?
Well, I guess you could say this is a hot streak where they've been competent for the last couple weeks. Um, it's I guess new. I want to take that very literally. Their whole starting rotation is new because all the actual starters are injured all at the same time. I did the math recently where the guys who made up 85% of their starts last year are all on the IL, all at the exact same time. So the rotation is led by Trevor Rogers, who I think is going to pitch in. No, he's actually not going to pitch in this upcoming series. So you get the big underbelly of the rotation, which is everybody else. They're just patching it together with a combination of journeymen and it's not even top prospects, but just it's really is the epitome of a non-competitive team where kind of a reason why they're in this situation in the first place is because the organization was not satisfied with the direction of the farm system that was coming in. Even last year, they made do with very little homegrown talent. And to this point, even though things are looking a little bit better, those guys are still, in most cases, multiple years off from reaching it. So it is a roster that is just plugged with a lot of these journeymen, a lot of these filler types so far. But they are just coming off of a surprising series split against the Phillies in Philadelphia, which is very hard to do, and a lot of thrilling one-run games. So I guess that has kind of been some of a common thread even from last year. Last year, they very famously were dominant in all these one-run games, and it just didn't seem sustainable. And now, in part because their offense stinks, and also because their bullpen is pretty good and trending in the right direction for the most part, they play a lot of close games, even if they don't come on the right end of most of them.
Yeah. So, and I was actually looking at the roster earlier because I did notice how you have a ton of phenomenal people on the injured list right now. And then you've got, the two players that you received from the White Sox last year that have been just awful this year with Tim Anderson and Jake Berger. And, Tim Anderson, previous batting title champ, and Jake Berger, who was just this phenomenal player for the White Sox. And now it's like they've just no. Well, I mean, Tim Anderson was kind of really losing strength before he went to Miami, but it's wild to watch both of those two just completely sink too. So it just seems like your roster is just kind of abysmal at best. You've got a few good guys. So
Well, those two really different situations, but as you noted, they're kind of in the same spot where below replacement level. With TA, it just has not looked good, with the exception of opening day. I think his very first hit as a Marlin was like her RBI double on opening day, and then since then it's just been this really disastrous combination of zero power and zero plate discipline. And even the defense has been really up and down overall. So you're at a point where it has once again been a hot topic of people clamoring for them to just part ways because he was just a 1-year flyer on a free agent deal, a guy that you pick up thinking that maybe you'll flip him at the trade deadline if he bounces back. And we're now close enough to the deadline where it's clear that he's not going to check that box for them. And it is really a fascinating question in terms of how long you hold on to a player in this position who does fit in well with their clubhouse and is kind of respected, And that's kind of, I think that has helped him, why there's no urgency for them to kick him down the road despite his struggles. With Berger, like it is, he was really great for the Marlins after coming over in that deal
Mhm.
last year. He was pretty immediately became one of their most popular players, and I think even still now is there's a lot of belief in him. There's still a lot of underlying talent there. How hard he impacts the ball, um, overall is still a lot like it was last year and just not turning into hits. But with him, that trade that they made to get him, they were hoping he would be around for a while. He's not even arbitration eligible yet. He's supposed to be this really significant piece of their lineup. And so in that case, it's going to be a really crucial second half of the year to try to like figure out who he really is and whether he's somebody you can slot in as an everyday player or whether you need to lower expectations for him moving forward. So we have two guys that is part of. I think a lot of Marlins fans were perhaps a little foolishly wishing or hoping that somehow their offense would get better from last year despite making so few additions. And as it turns out, it has somehow dropped down one level, and Berger is a big reason why. But yeah, I
Yeah.
still have more hope for him relative than I do to Tim Anderson at this point.
And he's the one I feel like can turn it around. He's still, I mean, he's still young enough, and he was such a fan favorite in Chicago. You guys seem like you immediately embraced him, especially with like the burger nights and everything. And he's such a nice guy. I've talked to him a few times now, and he's just always been so pleasant, and I can see why everyone loves him. And he's just the type of player that you just hope for the best for his career, especially because he's really been through the ringer with injuries and mental health and everything else. So I wanted to check in on them. And I mean, with this season, how it goes, and this is kind of a joke, but do you think Kim Ing cursed to this organization prior to her departure?
Well, I'm assuming you may have seen the news, but right before we started recording, it was announced that she's finally like landed another position as this senior advisor for this up and coming softball league that is launching next year. Literally this morning is when it was announced, and I myself have been wondering what she's going to do next, with the
Mhm.
assumption that eventually she'll get back to the major league front office. But for people that were wondering, she is now part of this emerging softball league, the Athletes Unlimited Softball League, as a senior advisor to what they're doing. Yeah, it was awful optics. It was handled really poorly, her
Yeah.
departure, any way you want to slice it, coming off that postseason berth, where it was kind of well understood that this was the last guaranteed year of her deal, and with ownership from Bruce Sherman saying that she did everything they could have wanted, and like
Mhm.
realistically, the team won more games than anybody could have thought last year. You would think that that is kind of the main factor you look at regarding whether to like extend that contract and keep her around in some form in the front office. Um, like there were her it was really there's a couple ways of looking at it, though, because of the struggles that they had developing young talent, and I think she has to have some sort of responsibility for that, having been around the previous 3 years, where
Mhm.
whatever systems they had in place just were not creating homegrown, especially on the hitting side, not creating guys that had any sort of impact on the hitting side. That there was going to have to be some significant changes if she was going to stay or not. There would have to be new people brought in underneath her to really reform whatever they were doing wrong on the player development side. But it's yeah, yeah, I wouldn't say it's been a curse. It's just that it's been really disappointing how quickly under Peter Bendix that they were willing to pull the plug on what it is that she had built there
Mhm.
previously. Like those were his decisions. That I don't think she is a puppet master forcing him to embarrass himself this year.
Right.
Like this was when they decided to move on and bring in somebody that had a strong player development background and sign him to a long-term deal. The thinking was that they were going to ease into another rebuild right here. So yeah, it's kind of a pick your poison situation where I think inevitably if Kim was still in charge, they would have regressed this season regardless.
Yeah.
And it just wouldn't have been quite this drastic. I don't think she would have leaned into losing games the same way that Peter Bendix has.
Yeah, that's fair. I really feel like they just gave her the raw deal. I almost feel like they just set her up for failure because, like you said, there are a lot of people under her that were kind of not doing their jobs as they should, I suppose, is the best way to say it. So I'm looking at the NL East. You guys are obviously not as bad as the White Sox, but you are still in last place. You've got the Phillies, which are like the best team in baseball right now. You've got Atlanta, really good despite losing so many people this year already. And then the weirdly hot Mets, currently being managed by, I think, Grimace and anyone that went to the NYC Pride Parade. So is this season just kind of hopeless? Like I said, it seems like even the owner is just okay with giving up this season.
Well, I mean, in terms of being essentially mathematically eliminated already, it's that's kind of a foregone conclusion right here. And as I mentioned, just a lot of their really interesting prospects are still a little while away. So you're not even looking forward to those traditional prospect call ups, with the exception of Max Meyer. Like that was one of the early indications that this season was going in a really frustrating direction when they optioned down one of their, he was their best starter very early in the year, Max Meyer to AAA. And he's still been down there for what we suspect is heavily service time related reasons. So he'll come back soon, eventually. I wouldn't say that's necessarily appointment viewing the rest of the way, but yeah, they have been a couple other like surprise guys, such as Otto Lopez, who has basically filled in for Luis Ariz since he was traded. Otto Lopez has been their everyday second baseman. And as an overall player, he's a lot more than you would suspect from a waiver claim, essentially. So that is somebody that like pretty quickly has tried to push himself into their long-term plans, and to see an extended look at him the rest of the year would be kind of interesting overall. And eventually some of these pitchers are going to come back from the injured list. First, it's going to be Edward Cabrera later this month, and then Ryan Weathers not that far behind. And Weathers in particular was one of their really big surprising successes the first couple months of the year, as he seemed to be a bust, just a former first round pick that had a 6 ERA in parts of 3 seasons, and then he took a big leap forward entering this year. So I'm more so than any other individual player, I'm interested to see what he keeps going the rest of the season when he comes back. Yeah, but other than that, you're kind of just rooting for interesting trades at this point. I think we'll get into it in a little
Yep.
bit, where there just are not a whole lot of obvious sellers at the moment, and this could be a seller's market that works in the Marlins' favor. They have some pieces that are definitely going to move, and that just expedites this rebuild process to be able to potentially take advantage of these circumstances.
Yeah. So you mentioned trade deadline. That was kind of my follow up. What, specific position or anything? And I mean, you could just say like the entire team at this point, but what do you think the Marlins approach is going to be, and like what spots really direly needs filled in at this trade deadline?
They need to figure out on the hitting side. They need to continue to add, which is what they've already done with the trades that they've made. Like right on the eve of opening day, they traded their utility guy John Birdie for a couple of young outfielders. When they traded Luis Ariz, the 3 main pieces of that deal were also on the position player side. So I think they're just going to continue to lean into that and try to get some more talented hitters into the organization to kind of replace the players that a good organization would have drafted and developed themselves. But in order to just fill the holes that they have in that regard, they still have very pressing long-term questions at most crucial up the middle positions, at catcher, where they have terrible production the last few years, and at shortstop as well, where it's been a revolving door the past several seasons. Most recently, Tim Anderson has very clearly shown that he is not the guy for them moving forward at that spot. So yeah, ideally you want to get somebody at catcher or shortstop that has the potential to be an everyday player, but those guys are also extremely difficult to pry away even from contending teams. If somebody has a strong chance of sticking at those spots and being a decent hitter, they're one of the better prospects in baseball, you would think. So they're going to have to get creative right there, potentially look at the really lower levels of organizations and pick out guys from rookie ball or low A that project to have really great upside at those up the middle spots, and try to trade for them. So one of the big questions is what they do with Jazz Chisholm Jr., who is their center fielder, who is
Mhm.
healthy for once
Yeah.
um, to this point in the season, and he's hitting. He's been like this is not his best individual season, but it's his most consistent and well-rounded season. He's finally hitting left-handed pitching, which he's basically never done before. So he's playing truly every single day. That's really valuable, and it's kind of a crossroads for the organization as to whether you sell high on him at this moment or whether you think he could be, as just 26 years old, whether you actually invest in him as being one of the few guys to be the face of your team during the course of this
Mhm.
rebuild. I think, being very cynical, I think the expectation is that they're going to look to sell high on that while he's still healthy because he has more value than any of these other potential trade chips that they have. He is somebody that if you trade him, you could bring back a younger version of him. You could
Yeah.
probably bring back a guy in the upper minors who has similar tools and just hope that they actually can be a serviceable hitter once they reach the big leagues. And it's obviously a gamble to do that. But yeah, they're in a situation where if they feel they're still several years away from being competitive again, then that's the type of chance that you take. That
Yeah.
is the big storyline, though, is about what they do with Jazz because he could fit in a lot of different places. It
Mhm.
would be yeah, and it would be a lot of mix of emotions if they did deal him after having overall just a really decent run with this team the last few years.
Yeah, and he was one that I think a lot of people are excited about. I mean, I know my son was jazzed when he was on the cover of MLB The Show last season. Um, but yeah, everybody's looking for a good young batter like him. So yeah, I guess if you're not serious, send him to a team that might do something with him so he can be phenomenal instead of just, pretty good this year. Um, and with him, and I was looking, and who's who is going to make it to the All-Star game this year for the Marlins? Is there anybody but him? And if he's even still there by the time they get to the All-Star game?
At this point, it seems pretty likely it's going to be Tanner Scott, their closer, because he was awesome last year, just mainly as a setup guy. So he was bypassed in that situation. There's so few spots for actual relievers on the All Star team, and it's almost always guys that are getting saves. And to this point in the season, he's been their full time closer. He got off to a really bad start the first few weeks, and then like since the end of April, he's been almost automatic. He's had think 22 in his last 22 outings. He's had 21 scoreless outings. He said it's been essentially perfect for the better part of 2 months at actually preventing runs. But he is even more so than Jazz. He is an obvious trade candidate because he's a pending free agent. They are definitely going to move him. I think they're going to move him after the deadline. Um, that would certainly make this an easier choice if he's still with the team through the All Star break for him to be the guy that represents them. He's overall he's been a great find. He was crucial to them last year, and he's been really their best player relative to his role on the team this year. He is the few save opportunities that you can get on a team that struggles this much. He has been awesome at it. So I think it's going to be him, and they're certainly going to be limited to one All Star. It's going to be a question about whether Scott or Chisholm fit better with the surrounding players on that National League roster. But I think Tanner has been more extraordinary. So I think he's more deserving in this case.
Yeah, and excellent closers are so hard to come by, and you don't really see so many like electric, really great ones in the All-Star game. I just remember, I think it was 2021 that Liam Hendricks made it, and that was like a fun year because they had him mic'd up because they're idiots and they don't listen to what he says on the mound ever. So I hope they just it's like they need to have the swear button just on hand this whole time. But yeah, it's a good point. I didn't even consider him, but yeah, he has been a great closer. So we'll take a very quick break and then we will just get into what this series is going to look like. All right. Okay, welcome back. So it is too early still for pitching matchups on this, but what can you really tell me about the starting rotation that you've got right now? Or even if you just have an idea of who might be up based on kind of their schedule.
Yeah, my projection for this series, I assume it's going to be the same guys in this group just because literally everybody else is injured, the
Yeah.
Marlins on the starting pitching front. So I think they're going to stick with, if they just continue the current routine that they had during the previous series, it would be the final game is going to be Valente Beozo. The middle game is going to be Yoni Chirinos. Who am I missing from this first time through the rotation? Just give me one moment to make sure I have this right. It would, oh yes, Rodri Munoz. Would it be him? Yeah. So it should be in this order: Rodri Munoz for the opener, Yoni Chirinos, and then Valente Beozo. And so two of those guys I'm sure you've never heard of because Rodri Munoz and Valente Beozo never pitched in the big leagues until this year. Um, and I guess Beozo is the most interesting one just because he's the novelty here. We're talking right now after he's only made one big league start. He threw 5 scoreless innings against the Royals. And he was the guy that was picked up just a couple months ago in a trade with the Astros. Wasn't really valued that highly at all. He they really just rushed him up because they needed an available arm. But he's just a crafty right hander who throws. He doesn't really have a single put away pitch. He has to rely on commanding his stuff and pitching to contact. And so he'll have one start in between now and then. And I'm not all that hopeful about how it's going to go, but it'll be Beozo's third big league start. And yeah, Chirinos is just a prototypical journeyman who had pitched most substantially with the Rays for a few years, but he never really made it through a full year as a starting pitcher. He's bounced around a little bit. He'd been good in AAA, so they decided to give him a shot. Yeah, he has a deep pitch mix, but he's not going to wow you either. And then Munoz is the one that has the most interesting stuff. He's had the most significant run in the rotation this year due to need. He's been up and down a few different times. He throws mid 90s. He has a really interesting cutter and an interesting slider that he could, at times, he's been unhittable for little stretches. I think he carried a no hitter against the Mets through into the 6th inning when he made an appearance there.
Mhm.
But he's also among the league leaders in home runs allowed. It is a really fascinating disparity where sometimes he looks great, but in almost every start, he makes one mistake right down the middle of the plate that somebody hits out. As I alluded to, just because of the injuries, this is what was supposed to be a strength of the team is at this moment a pretty big weakness right there. So I think even against the White Sox, you'd have to say that the White Sox are probably going to have the slight edge starting pitching wise in those 3 games.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell because I feel like it's ever revolving with this team because we are down one pitcher that honestly can stay down and never come back, and I'm okay with that. But we've kind of been rotating between a lot of these very green rookies. Oh, my dog has decided to join. Because we've got Jonathan Cannon right now, we've got Drew Thorpe, and they've both been great. And I do think you'll probably see Garrett Crochet during this, which is unfortunate because he is great. But you probably see a bunch of rookies who are really hit or miss right now. Because I do think Jonathan Cannon, and I'm trying to remember the other one, another baby that we've got. Um,
Recently called up Drew Thorpe.
yeah, yeah. I don't think you'll see Drew Thorpe during this.
Right.
You might see John, like I said, you'll probably see Jonathan Cannon. Um, and then Garrett Crochet for sure. I'm not sure. You might see Drew Thorpe actually. Now I'm looking back, or you could see Chad Cool. That's your other possibility, depending on because they also kind of mix up their rest days every once in a while, depending on their team. So yeah, you'll see some rookies for sure during this series, but they do still kind of have an edge. They have been surprisingly really great, despite playing like the Rockies just recently. So with this, what player on this team might be the biggest threat to the White Sox?
That is a good question among this team. I guess the easy answer is Jazz at this point among on the position player side. He has, yeah, he's overall it's been a really consistent run for him overall. You know, he's going to be in the lineup pretty much every single day. He's I feel like he's overdue to hit for power. That's really been the one thing dragging down his overall numbers from being good to being actual all-star caliber, is that he's hitting home runs less frequently than he has in any previous year. So overall, as a guy that is, I think, has improved his plate approach certainly as this year has gone on, and who has just been so consistent against righties and lefties. I think he's overdue to do some damage and actually slug the ball, and he should, because he has really great raw power, even if it hasn't shown up in games quite as often as you would think this year. There's always the possibility that's a Jake Burger revenge series, because I'm still a little confused about why it is that he is struggling the way that he has been for the most part this season. So he's another guy that is kind of overdue for turning it back on, and who has maybe had a little bit of bad luck for someone that's still hitting the ball as well as he does, and who was also in the lineup pretty much every day. Like, I guess I wouldn't be shocked at all if Berger is the one that uh, has a really big impact as well.
I would be very happy for him, despite playing, my team now, just because I miss him. He's, like I said, he's just wonderful. Um, so are there any keys that the Marlins can really follow through on to actually win some of these games in this series? Because it'll be a pretty interesting series no matter what, with where the both teams are sitting at. But is there anything that they could really do to win a couple games?
Well, I think one key, yeah, you never want to root for anything unfortunate to happen. But if Garrett Crochet, the night before his start, takes a nice long trip down South Beach and just enjoys the nightlife while he's there, maybe that interferes with his preparation for the next start. That'd be great, because the Marlins are awful against left-handed pitching in particular this entire season. They have a 4-26 record against lefties this year. They finally had a good game right before we're talking on Sunday against Ranger Suarez. They went off all of a sudden, and they somehow lost that game despite getting their stuff together at the plate. But overall, they have just been awful against left-handers specifically. Yeah, so as long as he is his usual self, they are in big trouble. But if he isn't for whatever reason, then that would be pretty important for them to figure things out. Overall, they have been a better offensive team at home in Miami than they have been on the road. I don't know why that is overall, but yeah, just generally speaking, they have, especially recently, they have had this pretty frequent stretch of walk-off wins. At this moment, I think they lead Major League Baseball with 8 walk-off wins.
Oh, really?
Well, so if they do keep things close into the later innings at home, and it hasn't just been one guy. I think it's been, if not 8, then 7 or 8 different
Mhm.
players that delivered the winning hit in those walk-off wins. So yeah, it's simply keeping it close would I think they're going to have an advantage there, just based on how the this the pattern that we've been seeing of those walk-offs as the season has gone on.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Garrett Crochet and maybe not recovering from a night out. He has one of the 2 Michael Jordan numbers, and I always go back to the alleged flu game where he was
Yeah.
really just incredibly hungover, um, and was still great, and they still won. So I don't know, don't put it past those number 45s in any league, but you do kind of have an advantage because our bullpen is so hit or miss most days. So if the games are close in late innings, they are usually going to blow it completely. It's either there's going to have to be like a 14 to nothing lead for the White Sox to actually still win it in late innings, or if it's close, it's like every single relief pitcher that comes in will just start throwing balls everywhere and somehow manage to lose the game. We just saw it happen the other night. I think it ended in 14 or 15 innings against the Rockies, and it was a 3-3 game, and they gave up 2 runs in the 13th and 14th inning to lose. So they do struggle with late innings, especially in really close games. So with that series, and again, these are kind of funny questions for both teams at this point, but what are your fears heading into this series?
Okay, well, the biggest fear would be somehow if one of the Marlins starters gets injured, because
Yeah.
they literally have nobody else to go to if somebody else somehow goes down. So that, I guess that's the most important thing, just to keep a functional roster, is making sure that these guys get through their outings healthy. And the fact that I guess the easiest way to do that is just be cautious with how deep they go into the games and
Mhm.
being willing to pull them a little early at the sign of really stressful situations. I mean, so that would be the biggest fear right there. Other than that, yeah, I think you just have to flip around the previous thing about Crochet. That if he is his usual self, they're not going to have much of a chance. So I think you fear potentially um, them. It's been a long time since the Marlins have been the victims of a no hitter,
Yeah.
and but given the current state of their roster and how well, for the most part, Crochet has been when he's on his game, I guess that's the fear, is that the stars align and they get embarrassed against him in that game that he pitches.
Yeah, that might be the only game you'll see that. But anyway, moving away from our respective teams, of course, because this series will be very interesting and probably very low scoring. What are your thoughts overall, just, baseball in general with Major League right now? Like, do you have any hot takes or fun opinions or just any of that right now?
I'm just appreciating very much on the National League side what a mess the wild card race is at the moment, where almost every single team is in it, aside from the Marlins and the Rockies. Everybody else just jumbled in that big mess right there. I think that's really, it's fascinating. I mentioned before, it could be something that the Marlins capitalize on because as one of the few sellers available. But overall, I love the fact that we're now slightly more than halfway through the season, and so many different teams have hope, including a lot of teams that haven't been relevant in a while. It's been a while for the Pittsburgh Pirates. When the Washington Nationals, almost immediately after winning that World Series, they totally fell off the map, and now all of a sudden they are hanging on a little bit, and they're calling up one of the top prospects in baseball. Right as we're talking, James Wood, to make his
Mhm.
debut. So I love the chaos of that for sure right now, and yeah, I mean it's hard not to be totally in awe of Aaron Judge essentially repeating what he did a couple of years ago, one of the better offensive seasons we've ever seen, and and after last year when he was disrupted by injury and everything went wrong for the Yankees. Now I think I have family that's in New York and that are big Yankees fans, but I think for most people, yeah, it's they're not thrilled to see the team immediately bounce back next year and then have this guy performing by far and away as the best player in baseball. But it's great to have individuals like that that really
Mhm.
amaze us. In a year where Otani is only doing the hitting and he's hitting it amazingly well, but in a
Yeah.
moment where he can't definitively be the most valuable player because he's not doing both sides, to have somebody step up during a year where offense is down quite a bit across baseball, and yet you have somebody like Judge who is seemingly immune to all those league wide trends and kind of lapping the field in a lot of offensive categories. That has been a whole lot of fun. Overall, outside of Marlins themselves, there has been a lot of interesting baseball right here, and I think overall across the league, you see the pretty even distribution of talent.
Yeah.
With these two teams being two of the only exceptions to that at the moment, a lot of other teams have guys that you can be. They're just really talented. So I'm just privileged to, as somebody that does watch a whole lot of baseball outside of the Marlins themselves, it's been a treat to just see all the talent on the field.
Yeah, for sure. The Yankees have been really interesting this year because, you know, they lose Garrett Cole, their ace. They're total Cy Young. Like we all know, he's this phenomenal pitcher. They lose him so early into the season, and you did see Judge last year and how badly that toe injury did kind of just interrupt his season. But then you throw in Juan Soto, who is phenomenal, and then your pitching is perfectly fine. Carlos Rodon has kind of this bounce back year, and it's bad when your like fifth starter is Nestor Cortez. That's like the worst. When Nestor Cortez himself is great. And then to see Aaron Judge just completely make a wild turnaround and be the best hitter right now in baseball. And then paired up with Juan Soto. And then now Garrett Cole is back. And it's just like, what are they gonna do now? Like, is this going to be a World Series contender? Because they have all of these amazing pieces and they're paying them so much money. And it's been so wild to watch them, and as someone who usually picks the Mets over the Yankees, it's still so much fun because I love Garrett Cole, and it's still so much fun watching that team, which I would never have said 2 years ago even.
Right.
Because normally they're the enemy. Well, that's all I've got for you, unless you've got any other fun thoughts. But if not, just please let us know again where we can find you.
You can find me personally on Twitter. I'm at real Ely, ELY. But otherwise, wherever you see Fish on First, I'm usually behind that in some way, either writing or editing or recording podcasts or producing podcasts for them. Yeah. So for our all Marlins coverage, and hopefully we're open a little bit of news breaking during this trade deadline season. There's only a limited number of outlets actually on top of the Marlins these days, kind of for understandable reasons. So yeah, I guess the excitement and all the rumors flying around are it's fun, even in the big picture, and the challenges to stay interested in this current team. This next month is going to be a whole lot of fun, and it's going to be really tiring, but I think we're going to put out some really good stuff. So again, thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
I think the two of us are both doing great, seeing as how our seasons are going with our coverage and just trying to stay optimistic. So again, thank you so much, Ely. It was wonderful talking to you. Best of luck in this series. And yeah, we'll chat later. Bye.